The Detroit Lions and Jacksonville Jaguars squared off for their second joint practice of the week. And today the Lions looked more efficient from start to finish in this practice, and we're going to talk about it right now. What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit Training Camp Observation. I'm Miko, and in today's video, we are once again going to break down the biggest news, takeaways, and observations to come out of Lions training camp. Now, the Jags and the Lions met for their second joint practice of the week as they both gear up for their second preseason game of the NFL offseason. And after having a very up and down first joint practice with the Jaguars, the Lions definitely needed a day where they showed that they were able to bounce back and overcome some of the things that plagued them yesterday. So with that said, let's start with the offensive side of the football, and specifically Jared Goff, who was pointed out yesterday as not having the greatest day so far throughout camp. Well, today Jared was much more on point in both 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s. When looking at 7-on-7s, he found Khalif in the end zone twice for touchdowns. He also found Sam Laporta, and I think he even found Chase Cota at one point for a touchdown as well. Now, things didn't start nearly as well for Jared Goff when it came to 11-on-11s. His first series, he only attempted 2 passes, and one of those was an overthrow to Khalif Raymond, who had clearly gotten wide open on a deep route. And when it came to his second attempt, Jared Goff wasn't able to find anyone open and basically had to scramble, but more than likely he would have taken a sack if this was a real game situation. But the first series wasn't the one that mostly defined Jared Goff. Once the Lions came back and he got his second crack at 11-on-11s, he was much more surgical with the football. He found Josh Reynolds for an amazing 60-yard touchdown that was just truly beautiful and amazing route running and an amazing throw from Jared Goff for those two to link up for an easy touchdown. He also found Trinity Benson on an amazing in cut that would have set up the Lions for their second biggest play of the day. And finally, when the Lions moved into situational drills at the end of practice, Jared Goff was very efficient in moving them down the field when the Lions were only looking at having about a minute and a half or a minute to 15 seconds on the clock, and they had to get within scoring range. And Jared Goff didn't have any problems with this, going about 4 for 5 in this situation, and linking up with guys like Sam Laporta, Marvin Jones, and even David Montgomery. Now, while I haven't been able to attend many training camp practices this offseason, the performance that Goff put on today lines up more closely with what you had been hearing up until yesterday. And so with this type of practice, Goff looked efficient. He looked in command of the offense, and he was making all the necessary throws that he needed to. Again, there probably is some nitpicking here and there where there was a couple of routes where he probably in real game situations is probably going to throw the ball away instead of taking a sack. But for the most part, when guys were open, Goff found them and he got the ball to them quickly and efficiently. Another standout from the offense today was the return of Trinity Benson. As we've been talking about for most of the offseason so far, when it comes to the Lions wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 type positions, there seems to be a lot of bodies there that are battling for that final few spots. And as of the last few practices, the guys that seem to have been leading the pack as far as wide receiver 5 or potentially even wide receiver 6 had to kind of go to both Dylan Drummond and Chase Cota based off of how they've been performing in practice and in preseason games. Well, today, Benson got back in the mix, and it didn't take long for him to make his presence felt. Like I mentioned earlier, Goff found Benson on a deep route that probably would have went for 20-plus yards with both the run and the catch, but that wasn't his only impressive catch of the day. He also had a toe-tapping catch on the sidelines, where again, just showing amazing concentration and real strong poise to be able to make that catch and get out of bounds. It's a small sample size, but when we're talking about the receivers that really stood out on today, Trinity Benson definitely caught my eye with both his size, speed, and just his ability to get open. With him now healthy, he's someone to keep an eye on once the Lions and the Jaguars square up for this preseason game, because again, right now, Dylan Drummond probably seems like more of a lock to make this roster than Trinity Benson. But with the injuries to Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown at the moment, this is going to give all of these other wide receivers opportunities to rise to the top and showcase themselves as being viable for those final 1 to 2 spots. In fact, Dan Campbell said just as much during his press conference today that, listen, without JMO being available, without Amon-Ra being out there to take snaps for the next week and a bit, this gives the other guys an opportunity. There's about 1 to 2 spots available in this wide receiver group. And if Trinity Benson wants it, he's going to have to make the most of this preseason game and the few days where Amon-Ra is not available. Now, some other quick notes on a few other wide receivers that definitely caught my eye as well. Chase Cota does stand out. I know there were a couple people wondering why Chase Cota wasn't getting more hype before the preseason game where he kind of bust onto the scenes. But I honestly don't have an answer for it, but I can honestly tell you that in today's practice, he definitely had a couple routes and a couple catches that make you kind of go like, "Oh, okay, he can definitely play at this level." He had one catch that would have been really impressive, but unfortunately, he ended up out of bounds where Nate Sudfeld threw a really nice rope towards the outside, but Chase Cota was able to snag it with one hand, but just couldn't get 2 feet down. Again, I'm not sure how much of a lead he might have on a Trinity Benson, but much like how Tom Kennedy has been that wide receiver that seems to be a favorite for, the second or third tier quarterbacks, Chase Cota could very much be that for both Nate Sudfeld and potentially Teddy Bridgewater or Adrian Martinez. And if he can continue to put together strong preseason performances, he's another guy that could potentially make a play for that final wide receiver spot. And Dylan Drummond probably didn't have the biggest plays of the day, but he was someone that found opportunities to get open for both Nate Sudfeld and Teddy Bridgewater on the day. As I said earlier, he's my front runner for wide receiver 5 at the moment. And with that said, I don't think he needs a lot of big splashy plays, but he just needs to be able to showcase consistency. And when he was targeted today, he caught everything that was thrown his way. Now, while Goff and the wide receivers definitely looked much more improved from what we heard yesterday, one area that we talked about and highlighted on yesterday's practice that wasn't nearly as good today was the run game. And the run game was mostly limited to what I would say is a lack of intensity and a lack of pads. The Lions weren't in full pads today, so obviously it's hard to really get the run game going when your offensive linemen aren't able to fire off the ball fully and really be able to push guys back. And guys are considered down once they're contacted by the defensive line. But with that said, David Montgomery, Craig Reynolds, and Jamar Jefferson did find creases where they were able to get some big runs off during today's practice. But again, limited pads, which meant that the run game wasn't the biggest highlight of today's practice. And one final note on the offense, and it's really hard to tell how much to really read into this, but I'm going to basically say that what I saw today is probably a really good sign that Matt Nelson is probably going to be settled into the right tackle spot. And that is that once again, he was lined up at right tackle for the second team. But at one series of 11 on 11s, the Lions trotted him out at right tackle with the first team with Panay Sewell at left tackle. Now, it's way too early to read into what that might actually mean, but my biggest takeaway is that one, they want to get Jermaine Ifedi as many snaps at left tackle as they possibly can. And they're probably also looking to get Matt Nelson accustomed to playing right tackle more frequently throughout camp and get a better evaluation of, hey, can he make the roster at this spot? For what it's worth, he didn't look bad at right tackle. Again, not a whole lot of pass rush and a whole lot of intensity going on, but considering the fact that at one point we saw Obane Eze get absolutely blown up and just kind of put into a spin cycle on a rep, and I never saw that with Matt Nelson, I'm going to go ahead and say that Matt Nelson had a pretty good day at right tackle. Now, let's move on to the defense. And yesterday, one of the biggest talking points about the defense was the fact that CJ Gardner-Johnson kept talking. And based on reports that came out of today's practice about the defense, that wasn't any different for today. CJ not only talked the talk, but he also walked the walk in today's practice, as he had a number of great coverage plays in both 7 on the 7s and 11 on 11s. In fact, he got an easy pick off of Trevor Lawrence, and I'm sure if I were on that side of the field, I'm sure he let everybody in the Jaguars know about it. And he also had an amazing pass breakup on a throw to Evan Ingram that unfortunately was negated by a defensive penalty on Jerry Jacobs. Now, ignoring the penalty for a minute, CJ showed amazing range to get from his safety spot to the sideline to be able to get a hand on this pass to get it broken up. I've been saying it since training camp kind of kicked off, but CJ is clearly bringing that energy and that mentality to this Lions defense that makes you believe that, like, hey, if other guys can follow suit, if other guys can get energized off of his energy, this defense can look drastically different from where they did a year ago. I'm not sure how much personality and energy, fuel a defense's performance, but something about the way he goes about his job really makes me believe that that can be true for this team. Now, unfortunately, based on where I was during training camp, I wasn't able to see as many defensive plays as some of the ones that I highlighted. But one thing that did kind of come out from some of the reports from training camp is that defensive end Josh Paschal once again had a really impressive day. And if you know anything about me, outside of Brian Branch, I'm also a very big Josh Paschal fan. And I have a lot of faith that Josh is going to have a really big year for the Detroit Lions and really validate the case of him being drafted in the second round last year. And with performances like today, Josh makes that look more and more likely, as he was reported to have multiple run stops, a couple pressures, and even a sack on the day. Again, he may not necessarily get starting reps because of the likes of Charles Harris or whatever, defensive front the Lions choose to roll with on any given game, but I fully expect Josh Paschal to make his presence felt whenever he's able to get on the field, whether that's in run stopping, whether that's in pass rush ability. I just think that Josh is really going to elevate his game this upcoming season. Now, unfortunately, it all wasn't rainbows and sunshine for the defense, as Cam Sutton kind of had a rough day on the day, giving up a couple touchdowns to Zay Jones during 7-on-7s, and just also being occasionally beat on a few other routes throughout practice. Now, while I am pointing that out, I don't mean to point it out as a way of something to be concerned about. Listen, the Jaguars have one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and they have one of the better wide receivers in the NFL in Calvin Ridley. Anytime that you're kind of in those types of matchups, or even in short field situations like red zone, even against a wide receiver like Zay Jones, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. But Cam Sutton, for the most part, throughout training camp, has been reliable, has been solid, and there's been plenty of highlights of him making pass breakups throughout camp. So just because he's having a bad day doesn't mean that there's any reason to be concerned about the season going forward. Like Dan Campbell kind of talks about, this team and this defense specifically is going to be ran and be efficient by how everybody works together. That includes the defensive line, the linebackers, the corners, and the safeties. Everyone's going to have to do their jobs near perfectly to help cover up for any type of deficiency they may have in another area. And last but not least from today's observation, a little bit of a kicking battle update. So again, based on where I was watching training camp today on the field, got a really good look at the Lions kickers. And I can see why this kicking battle is so difficult at this point. Both Riley Patterson and Parker Romo were near perfect throughout the day on kicks on the offensive side of the field. Both kickers took kicks from the same distance and didn't seem to have any problem making each of their kicks. I will say that from my own vantage point, there is a slight difference in how the ball comes off of each guy's foot. When Parker Romo kicks a football, it definitely looks like something that's being shot out of a rocket. And while Riley Patterson doesn't have the same force, I would still give him the edge in this kicking battle simply off the fact that he's been able to be consistent and be an NFL kicker at this point in his career more so than Parker Romo has. And I think with this coaching staff and what they're going to be looking for, consistency is probably going to trump overall kicking power. It's also worth noting that once the Lions moved into some situational drills, like I talked about earlier, that when Riley Patterson got his opportunity to kick the game winner for the Lions first team, he made his with no problem. Parker Romo, on the other hand, did seem to push his for a little bit further outside. But it's also worth noting that Parker Romo's kick was further than Riley Patterson's. So take with that what you will, but like I said earlier, I still kind of have Riley Patterson leading the pack in this kicking battle, and it would really surprise me if that wasn't the case come final cuts. So, guys, that's going to do it for today's Pride of Detroit training camp observations. If you have any questions or comments about today's practice, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you're looking for more information and more detail on today's practice, be sure to head over to prideofdetroit.com, where Jeremy has his latest observation article up, or you can check out whatever podcast streaming platform you use to check out Jeremy's post-practice podcast as well. Also, if you're new to this channel, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That way you can be notified anytime we upload a new video to this channel. Once again, everyone, I'm Miko here with Pride of Detroit. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.